Welcome to the Volunteer Nation podcast, bringing you practical tips and big ideas on how to build, grow, and scale volunteer talent. I'm your host, Toby Johnson, and if you rely on volunteers to fuel your charity, cause, membership, or movement, I made this podcast just for you. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Toby Johnson, and today we're going to talk about that sticky subject, volunteer and staff relations. It seems like everybody should just get along, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And we have an amazing guest advisor inside the Impact Lab. We are doing this POV series to really spotlight the expertise of our guest advisors inside the Impact Lab and to bring some fresh ideas and maybe new ways of thinking about some of those challenges that you are experiencing as a leader of volunteers or as a volunteer involving organization. So we've got a unique point of view here. Corina Sadler's with us. Hi, Corina.
Hello.
And she's been working with volunteers for a long time, and you may have seen her on social media. She's very active. She's also active in a lot of other things. I'll introduce her in a minute. But this topic of volunteer staff relations, it is so essential that our employees and our volunteers work together well. They are on the same team, even though sometimes they don't think they're on the same team. Everyone needs to be rowing in the same direction. Otherwise, you get stuck in the middle. You're not efficient. You're having conflict that is really unnecessary and unneeded. And in the end, everyone believe most people really want to do a good job, whether they are an unpaid volunteer or a paid employee. They have joined this cause again as a volunteer or have joined as an employee. Nobody's in the nonprofit sector to make, a killing. I know I worked 25 years in the sector and I wasn't there for the money, I'll tell you that. But, I was there because I loved what I was doing. I loved making a difference. And it was part of my identity. And I think that's the same for both employees and volunteers. And in some respects, maybe they are more alike than different. That doesn't mean necessarily we're going to treat volunteers and employees the same way, but we've got to do some active bridge building between these two groups so that they can feel comfortable, confident, and actually energized by working together. So that's what Corina's here to talk about. Corina Sadler is a CVA that spent her 20-year career focused on volunteerism in local government and committee work for state and international associations. She enjoys providing volunteer management guidance to nonprofits and municipalities to unite the community through volunteerism. In 2019, Corina received a National Impact Award from the Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement, or ALIVE, for displaying exemplary leadership in the field. And I can guarantee you she earned that and more. Corina has been a featured speaker on several podcasts, and now including the Volunteer Nation podcast, and has trained volunteer managers across the country through virtual and in-person presentations. She holds numerous certificates in the fields of volunteer and nonprofit management, along with a bachelor's degree in applied gerontology and nonprofit management from the University of North Texas. She has been a CVA since 2012. Corina, welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much. I'm super excited to add Volunteer Nation to my list. Finally.
I know, and I think I've been a CVA since about that time too. Yeah, so we're proud CVAs. We love being CVAs. Yes. So before we even get started, something caught my eye, and that is applied gerontology and volunteer management. So did you first work in senior services, or were you thinking you were going to move into senior services or hospice or some kind, hospital stuff? What were you thinking at that time?
Yeah. So growing up, I loved the Golden Girls, and I still love the Golden Girls very much. And then as a teen, I began volunteering for the first time. And in several of my volunteer opportunities, I was paired with older adults, typically older women, and getting the Golden Girls vibes. Right. So I was loving that. And then I watched my grandmother's, end of life journey in a nursing home. And so that was in my teens as well. So one of the last big places that I volunteered through high school was a senior recreation center. Those women in government there really mentored me. They opened so many doors for me. They took me on a university tour. I mean, so like above and beyond a mentor, but they showed me a career in aging services at a
Mhm.
senior center.
Mhm.
And so little did I know that was a career in local government. And I
Aw.
really thought, well, I don't want to be a social worker necessarily, but the university I went to had this gerontology program. So, study of aging, working with older adults, and they had nonprofit management, volunteer management. So, I did all of that, wondering what I could do with it. But I also interned at an RSVP program near the university, retired senior volunteer program. And that was really cool to see the pairing of all of this knowledge coming together. And so I did try a memory care facility and I tried a few different volunteering. But as a teen, at a museum, at the library, at the senior center, working with older adults alongside me was really pivotal in my choice to study that. And it's still a huge part of my passion and where I give as a donor to organizations that serve older adults now.
That is so awesome. I don't think you know, but we have something in common around this because I used to run a program, work for 6 years running a helpline for Medicare beneficiaries across the state of Washington.
Mm.
And I started as a trainer of volunteers. I had left another nonprofit job and I was really interested in becoming a trainer and I wanted to work with volunteers directly. And so I would travel around my region in the state of Washington and train mostly older adults. We had some, intergenerational volunteers, but mostly it was older adults because they were more interested in helping their peers navigate Medicare and other health insurance. And they had already been through it themselves and they knew how complicated it was. Such a just passion for understanding the details of Medicare and health insurance coverage, which anybody who's tried to help anybody get on Medicare or
Yeah,
Medicaid or long-term care
I
or
agree.
any of that good stuff, it is really complicated. And I had this group of volunteers. It was so complicated that would go. I didn't have to. I got to go every month and update them on whatever changes there were in like the federal poverty levels and like, changes in eligibility, updates to programs. I was there leading the charge when Medicare Part D rolled out the prescription drug benefit. So I knew upfront and personal, I worked with a lot of older volunteers, and I would tell folks that kind of would think, well, older volunteers, they're really like tech averse. They really, they struggle with change, all this. I said, not my experience at all. All of my volunteers needed to use the computer to be able to look up plans for our beneficiaries. And they brought a lifetime of, their professional experience, their training, their school of hard knocks, their family upbringing, their lifetime of travel, wherever they went. I mean, they bring so much wisdom that I'm like, there is no need to not want these folks, And sometimes I think we lean towards, oh, we need to diversify, we need to have intergenerational volunteering. We only have older volunteers as if it's something that is a problem. And I'm always like, I don't think so. I think you've got the wisest and most seasoned people on your team. I mean, what do you think about that?
Definitely. I mean, I had a call a couple weeks ago from an older adult volunteer who said, Karina, don't they want somebody younger to do this? I've been doing this a while and I'm older now. What do you think? And I was like, no, age does not, equal success in this role that she was filling, that she has been doing for a long time. But I also had other volunteers who tell me in retirement, referring to their volunteer opportunity as their anchor day. Like, this
Yeah.
is my anchor day of the week. This is what's going to get me out of bed, get me rolling on to the
Yeah.
many other things that they do. So there's a lot of different perspectives that we hear from older adults, but I mean, my mom now has transitioned to retirement, and she's actually volunteering at the senior center where I volunteered. And
Wow.
she was not a volunteer. She was not a Girl Scout Rotary mom. This was not her. And so now she's having the volunteer experience for the first time. And I'm her plus one to the recognition this week. I'm really excited to
Oh,
see her
wow.
journey. Yeah, I'm very
That's
excited.
amazing, like, full circle moment. That is
Yes.
so cool. I love that. Yeah, I mean, my aunt, when she was getting ready to retire, she said, "I cannot wait to transition to my second career as a volunteer." And early in her retirement, she had 3 different volunteer gigs going. It's what she did full time, was volunteer at different
Yeah.
organizations. I mean,
And
she
I
loved it.
I think this group, the tech knowledge, I mean, come on, they were building IBM. I mean, these are phenomenal folks in this generation. And the technology, like you said, I experienced the same thing. They're on iPhones, they've got iPads, they're learning. Most of them are not scared and they see it as a tool, but they also want the human touch, the
Yeah.
relationship as well. They see it more as a tool versus maybe a younger generations who see it as a really like crucial part of whatever they're doing. But I love having our senior volunteers. They are incredible. And they really showcase what service can look like in a professional way, a really
Mhm.
organized way.
Mhm.
Mm, and those that are really active in their own communities, doing their own thing that customize it to where they want, they still like the formal volunteering. I feel like they still fit in with the structures and things that we have. They built a lot of those things and it makes sense still.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gang, we went off on a bit of a tangent around older volunteers, but the minute I
Yeah.
read that, I went, "Wait a minute, we've got to talk about this for a minute," because I knew we probably had similar experiences and perspectives on this. Corina, why do you think volunteerism is important right now in today's world? Like this moment in history, why is it important?
Feel like so many people are looking for that community, looking for an experience, looking to get offline, right?
Mhm.
And to be with others. And that can be a challenge for some. I mean, how do we make friends as adults? It's awkward. It can feel uncomfortable. Creating the spaces for people to be together. I mean, who else creates those? Maybe you buy a $10 coffee in your coffee shop, but let's say you can't afford that, or that's you don't like coffee. Where do you go to have experience with others? And I feel like our creating volunteer opportunities, dynamic, diverse opportunities for our volunteers to be members of multiple organizations, to serve in many different ways is really important for that community to continue to thrive. And we don't lose folks who are, late adopters or they just haven't discovered where they're going next. We tend to catch them through service.
Absolutely. I mean, that what you just said is so interesting when we think of life inflection points. When I do training with folks and I'm talking about, who are you looking for as an ideal volunteer and how are you going to target your messaging and where are you going to go and find that person? I say the lowest hanging fruit are people who are in life's inflection points, whether they're transitioning into retirement or they're leaving high school for college and they've got that gap summer, or they have moved into a new community. Those are all inflection points in people's lives where they are actively looking. Most people understand that community is going to be part of the way that they thrive. Most people know that at a gut level. Like when I move to my new town, I want to meet new people. And the way that I might be able to do that is volunteering. Or as I transition out of retirement, some of my friends will still be working. I won't be able to hang out with them
Mhm.
anymore. So I'd like to, or not as much, like to try meet new people. And so I think that is a very interesting service that volunteerism shows or helps. And then what you said about community cohesion and, it's just there aren't very many places nowadays that aren't monetized in some way that people can just be in community and be in community, I think in a safe space for the most part. I wouldn't say everywhere is a safe space necessarily, but where people can feel like, you know what, this specific cause, we're all in it together. It doesn't matter, how we vote outside of what we do here or what we believe outside. We all believe inside this volunteering space that's been created that we all believe the same thing, that kids need mentors or that older people need social time or that this community needs better nutrition or whatever it is, right? So it's a place for that to happen. Let's switch gears for a minute and talk about what we're really here to talk about. We've been on a tangent here, folks, so I'm glad that you're all being patient with us. But let's talk about improving volunteer and staff relationships. What belief do you hold about volunteer staff relations that most people in this field tend to get wrong or have myths about or misunderstandings about?
Well, I give kudos to everyone that's trying something, right?
Yeah.
I see things happening. I mean, that is awesome. Any investment in this subject, staff and volunteer relations, is worthy. Attempt, a pilot, a trial, doing something. Sometimes I feel like, and this might be coming from leadership, where there's an assumption that it's like a set it and forget it kind of thing. People
Mhm.
know how to work together, or we hire great staff. They can figure it out working with volunteers. It's no different than working with our clients, working with the public, or "Oh, we gave them a 30-minute tutorial last year. That's good enough. Why do we need to do it again?" Some of that mentality where there's a lot of assumptions about how comfortable people are engaging with volunteers. And then as
Mm.
under that leadership, assuming that's correct. That's true for my organization. Having staff development days where a lot of staff are coming together and there's no content about volunteer engagement, volunteer management, to be able to voice, to raise your hand and say, hey, I think there needs to be some of this content in our staff development day. That's something I don't always see our leaders of volunteers being comfortable doing, but I think they have to get comfortable saying, we need this, especially if that set it and forget it mentality is pervasive in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people are supervising volunteers or leading volunteers or partnering with volunteers and they don't supervise anybody else. And so to assume, and I always say, leading volunteers is in some respects harder than leading staff because there's more wiggle room. You don't see them every day. So, there's not that just on the job learning that you would expect from an employee like sink or swim, that doesn't work with volunteers. And volunteers can vote with their feet anytime they want. So, the type of leadership skill and the ability to partner with somebody and help them feel good about what they're doing and give them positive, confirming feedback as well as corrective feedback and all that, championing them, all those things are not like natural born skills in everybody, I feel like we assume that, well, because they're volunteers, it's just going to be an easier leadership job. And I'm always like, heck no, it's not. It's harder. So what happens, or why is this? Well, let me get to this question. As you think of your own development, you've been working in your municipality for a long time. What in your mind has changed about volunteer staff relations over the years? I mean, when you went into it early on when you were younger and newer to the field, has there been some kind of evolution in your thinking around volunteer staff relations?
Yeah, I think over time, we used to worry about the difference between, the volunteer role and the staff role. What do volunteers do? What do staff do? And over time, with policies and procedures and creating a structured program and enhancements over the years, that doesn't become as much of a worry. But I was really looking at what is the role between the paid staff and the volunteer coordinator, volunteer manager? What are the
Mm,
tasks that I want to empower them to do?
mm,
And what are the tasks that really should be kept by me because of my expertise, because I'm really good at it, because I can leverage my volunteer engagement expertise in that way? So that give and
mm,
take of responsibilities, while yes, I want staff to help me and help volunteers, I also need to be aware of where does my expertise really shine and make sure I
mm,
don't give up too much of that because it's a powerful thing. Like I'm really good at recruiting, about using my volunteer management software to do targeted recruiting. Our staff cannot do that at the same
mhm,
level that I can. And
mhm,
that's okay. But what
mhm,
can they do to support these initiatives? I think that has really changed over time because earlier in my career, I did not see myself as that expert yet.
mm,
I didn't have my CBA. I wasn't asking some of these higher level questions when looking at, problem solving within the organization. But now that I can, it's really helpful to determine where are their skill sets really leveraged the best
mhm.
to keep all this momentum every day.
Yeah, it's sort of a strengths-based leadership philosophy. What are we good at? And also, we don't want to duplicate effort, especially in recruitment. You don't want 50 million people out there making the same ask. So it makes sense. And I love how you've grown into where you're comfortable and where you've grown your skills and you feel confident in your skills and can coach others and owning that space of expertise. I think that's really important for leaders of volunteers. And it's important for organizations to respect that expertise and lean on it and leverage it when it's needed, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Susan J. Ellis used to say that in her writing, and then Toby, you told me that through all of your trainings and your blog posts. that it's okay for me to be that expert and to continue to pursue excellence. And then I can route other people to this knowledge so they feel the same way. And when I get phone calls from nonprofits or from other organizations that say, "Hey, Karina, can you come and speak to our staff?" And I'm thinking, don't you have a volunteer coordinator? Like,
Yeah.
that should be the person that can
Yeah.
speak to your staff. I'm happy to chat with them a little bit, but really, I'd love to see that transition for others to be able to see their talents and effectively kind of engage them in their work.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes folks are waiting for someone to give you permission to own it, to own your and I remember early on in my own career when I started, Volunteer Pro in my business and the more you start thinking about what's your personal brand and what do you want to give to the world, that kind of thing. The more you are yourself, the more powerful you are. And so we don't even necessarily and shouldn't become really somebody else. We can inhabit that and own that leader of volunteers role by being more of who we are. We're more powerful when we are who we are. I mean, people, I was just talking with a mastermind group I'm part of this morning about owning your power, and being direct. When if you're known as being direct, just be direct. And that's something I'm known for, is being very direct with folks. So it's interesting to see how you've evolved into your role and into your profession. Why do you think nowadays, we talked about why volunteerism is important nowadays. What about volunteer staff relations? Why do you think it's essential right now to focus? I mean, leaders of volunteers and organizations have so many different balls there, or plates they're tossing in the air and hoping they don't fall. They're wearing many hats. They're doing all these things and they're like, "Karina, really? I'm going to do one more thing." Why is this really essential? And I mean, I believe it is essential. So I'm just going to put that out there. Spoiler alert. Karina, I both think this is essential. But Karina, why do
Yes.
you think it's essential?
It's definitely essential. I mean, we're pairing these dynamic workforces together, our paid and unpaid workforce. That's a challenge. It takes supervision and skill. It takes all the things that make us CVAs in real time. But we're also selling, like we're selling service to both sides, and
Mm,
they have to get along
mm,
for the recipients of service, for the clients, the people that are benefiting from all of this work to move our mission forward. But we have to understand that the challenges, there's a lot of fear that comes with working with new communities, new folks, our paid staff. They might say, "Oh, I can't fire a volunteer. I can't
mhm,
reprimand a volunteer and say that they made a mistake. I'm embarrassed. I don't know how I would say this to a volunteer." And so those conversations, they have to come from a place of honesty and sometimes vulnerability. But we have to have those conversations and we really need people to work together. I mean, our volunteer communities, there are advocates in the rooms that we are not in. They're in
mhm,
communities we have
mm,
not touched.
mm,
They are our voice to, bust those myths about nonprofits, about the work that we do. And to our staff, they have to see this dynamic unpaid workforce for what it is. It's people that care about what they're doing at work.
right.
Sometimes we go home to people that don't really understand what we do at work or to say that they care about what we do at work.
Mhm,
There's thousands of volunteers that care what we do at work.
mm,
And that can be really powerful if we can frame it and talk to staff about who these folks are. And they're not just filling in an application to come in and do something random. They're applying to help us in
mhm.
our jobs.
And can also grow into their love like you did in your career as a teenager, right? You didn't know about senior services and, what the whole network was about. And, you grew into a love for this cause. I mean, you might have started because of community service requirements or service learning, or just because volunteerism was part of what your family did. I'm sure you didn't, as a young person go, let's see, what are the different causes out there and which one will be the best match for when we're young, we don't know. We're just like, oh, that sounds fun. I'll give it a try. So we
I
have
went to my
people.
volunteer center website
Yeah.
and I made a profile and I started looking what's the volunteer center highlighting, and will they call me
Mm,
back, and do they allow teens? And
mm.
I that was my little hub. I went there for community to find my next volunteer opportunity.
Mhm. And then discover this wonderful world of older adults, and working with older adults. So I think sometimes it's such a subtle but important point you're making, that there are a lot of people in our lives that don't understand the work we do when we work in nonprofits. I remember when I worked with, unhoused youth, but people would say, "Well, what do you do?" I go, "Well, I've started and run a home employment and training program for homeless youth, and we have education, and we do GED prep, and we get folks into city college, and we help kids get jobs, and we help them in transitional living. We help kids get off the street and like make it happen, right?" And they're like, "Oh, that sounds so hard. Oh, I'm so sorry." And they would have this pitying look in their face. And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "I'm helping kids get off the street." Like, yes, it's hard. Yes, there's sometimes secondary PTSD you're experiencing as a staffer. There's added stress. You're seeing kids at their lowest time in their life, and you're helping young people. We had to mete out like consequences sometimes where kids couldn't get services because they weren't following through on things. That's not easy. Have it be pitiful, I was like, no, that's not what I do at all. I help kids get off the street and have a life. I mean, where's the pity in that? So I knew that, like, I had friends who also worked in nonprofits, but I had other friends who didn't, and they had no clue. And yet our volunteers totally understand, because often they're side by side, shoulder by shoulder, right on the front lines. Now, whether you run a direct service organization, or you're an arts and culture, or you're an advocacy organization, doesn't have to be direct service where they care about whatever you're doing, whether it's a, day on the Hill to, talk about a specific policy or whatever. So, or it's the love of ballet, and all that goes on behind the scenes to make this beautiful performance happen. So I feel that's such an important thing for staff to remember, that people, they understand, like you understand, how important this is, what you're doing. Yeah. So,
And then the training in the Impact Lab, I talked about, which is available for recording. If you go into the Impact Lab, you can check out my training. It'll be there all year. I talked about the matching the motivators, right? So the motivators of our staff have motivators for why they applied for that role and why they're taking on a project or initiative. And we have volunteers with similar motivators, and we can do some matchmaking if there is issue, right, or we have a mismatch. It's either something's not working, going back to what brought not only the staff member to the organization, but our volunteers to this program, and how can we maybe put them together in a different way to match those underlying motivators to where they can see these things in real time.
yeah, I love that conversation inside your seminar. Well, let's take a quick break from our chat with Corina Sadler on how to improve volunteer staff relations. When we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about some advice from Corina, as well as how you can get your hands on that training. So we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Hey friends, have you ever felt overwhelmed and unable to focus on the right things at the right time? Maybe you're not even sure where to put your time and energy to get the most traction with your volunteer program. Well, guess what? We've got a tool that can help you. It's called the Volunteer Strategy Scorecard. In about 3 minutes, you can get a PDF report that helps you understand where your gaps are, where you can focus energy to get big traction, and what your maturity levels are across 5 domains of volunteer engagement. It's a super cool tool. It's taken us a while to get it out, so I'm really excited it's finally found its way into the world. I hope you'll check it out. Just click on the link inside the show notes or in the link in the comments below and get started. Again, it only takes 3 minutes, and then you can get a lot of clarity on your next steps. Okay, we're back to our discussion with Corina Sadler on how to improve volunteer staff relations. This has been such a great conversation, Corina. I'm having fun. I'm really excited about, I think we often take this as like problematic. And what I like about this, volunteer staff conflict, relation, I think what immediately comes to mind is problematic. Oh, people are resistant to taking volunteers. People don't speak well about volunteers. They treat volunteers as second class citizens. Yes, those things are true in some cases. But I think if, we've been talking from a more aspirational point of view, talking about what's possible, talking about what already exists, that sometimes I think it's about awareness on both sides. Similarly with staff may be doing things that we may see as harmful to volunteers, and volunteers may be doing things that feel harmful to staff. Like, hey, they're not following through, or hey, they're here to take my job, which is crazy because they're not. I don't know anybody who volunteers who wants to work full time at this organization. I mean, sometimes they get hired, but it's not really the thing. But we've talked a lot about this aspirational. When you think about improving volunteer staff relations, can you share an example, either from your own work or your work with a client or with a partner or with a partner department in your organization or in your municipality where a slight change may have led to a significant impact?
I think talking about what makes any of these situations uncomfortable, doing
Mm,
coaching with staff to say, hey, I'm a resource to you. And I tell staff that a lot. I'm a resource to you. Come and let's talk. Yes, I love volunteers. Yes, but I am also walking the line that I am a paid staff member as well. And so I am on their
mm,
side too. So I think offering the coaching calls with kind of like you do in the Impact Lab, but internally with my team to say, I'm happy to talk with you about it. And even practicing the phrases that we can say
mm,
out loud to each other, don't make them feel silly. But hey, this is what I would say. And then I say something, and they were like, oh, well, okay, I could say this. And even if also the positive things, right? How to recognize and appreciate a volunteer as well. Not everyone's comfortable giving kudos or how do I make this feel authentic? I'm not a cheerleader type person, but I think I need to give kudos or to show, some appreciation. And then in the tough times where I'm like, let's just talk. Tell me what happened.
mm.
Okay, here's some things I probably would have said in that moment, but what happened and we can move on from here. I think treating it a little bit like coaching, I think is
Uh-huh.
helpful for staff to feel like, okay, I can be comfortable talking about this. Yes, Karina knows I don't have all of the answers and I'm not a pro at this, but I want to try.
Yeah, I love that, becoming that internal coach where people can safely come to you. I think they won't tell you if they don't feel safe coming to you. People will just keep it to themselves and you'll
It's
see
a
the
constant reminding them and telling them
yeah.
or catching a wind of something and saying, "Hey, I wanted to follow up. I noticed that you said just a little bit of this earlier. So can we talk? And then next time, give me a call."
Yeah.
It's a constant reminder.
Yeah, not shaming people. I think there's a lot of blaming and shaming sometimes inside organizations, and if you can erase that from the equation, you can have better relationships. For someone who knows that their organization needs to improve in this area, whether they're an executive director, we have executive directors that listen to the pod and C-suite folks. We also have leaders of volunteers, lots of leaders of volunteers. If anyone feels overwhelmed, maybe they're leading a very small nonprofit and they're wearing all the hats, or maybe they work in a volunteer services department and they're the one that everybody looks to come up with answers around this. When improving volunteer staff relations, what are some, you know, next steps or quick wins or something? What should people do if they're like, "Oh, I don't know. I feel overwhelmed. This is a lot."
It's a great question. Especially departments of one or the people wearing many hats. I definitely feel that. I train with those volunteer coordinators. You cannot tackle everything at once. So where's the biggest rub? Or the top two rubs that are just kind of a sticky point, or you have lost volunteers, or your
Mm,
relationships with the staff member have really changed. I would approach those first. The ones that have really had impact. Now we have volunteers and staff that have a bad day. Their personality is just, you know, different. But the things that are really creating an issue a longer term, the next day
Mm,
it's still the problem. Now someone's not calling you anymore. The volunteer isn't signing up anymore. I think
mm,
those kind of things we need to stop and evaluate what has happened
mhm,
and what didn't happen,
mhm.
and then do some fact finding, investigate, get all the facts together, and then make the plan of what is this issue. And sometimes it's communication. Sometimes it's hurt feelings. It's a conversation to make the volunteer or staff member feel heard and understood. And then it's refreshed and everything is good. Other times it's really looking at where did this start? And it might predate you. You
Yeah.
could be newer in this role and have no idea the foundation that was laid for some of this to continue. But having all of that information and being able to say, hey, we have to make change, and here's the impact it will have, is really helpful. But doing the fact finding and getting people to be honest, it takes some practice to be able to talk with others to really kind of get to the root of what's going on. So tackle one rub that's been going on, get all the information together. And as people give you details, sometimes it's therapeutic for them to say, wow, no one's ever noticed that I no longer volunteer on Wednesdays anymore. And I really appreciate you
Mm.
reaching out to find out why.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I've been guilty of that. Like, we all have been raised in different ways to manage conflict. It's the way that our family, usually it's how our families have managed conflict. Sometimes it's brush it under the rug. Sometimes it's just, I'm going to give you the silent treatment, which is volunteers not showing up anymore. I'm going to give you the silent treatment. Or, it's, I'm going to blow into a rage. Sometimes for some people, it's really big. There's different ways people manage conflict. And I think, especially for the quiet quitters and the silent types, reaching out that someone actually noticed is interesting because they're not going to tell you most of the time. I mean, yes, we do exit interviews and we do pulse checks and we do surveys and all of that, but most of the time I feel because volunteerism, it's not socially acceptable to necessarily complain about your volunteering.
Mhm.
Volunteering is supposed to be quote unquote inherently good, which, we could debate whether or not that's true. Or volunteers feel like, well, it's not my place. I don't know. I mean, but I've worked with volunteers who've told me in my face something's wrong. And I love those folk because I'm like, great, awesome. And it's usually somebody with like a management background. And they're like, I see it. And I'm like, great, let's get you on a committee working with like improvement, like let's leverage that like insight you have. So I like to, when people bring stuff up, lean in and say, tell me more. Just tell me more about that. I want to understand it. But I do think that
Mhm.
we're not all assertive communicators. For some of us, we're not assertive because something happened in our life that being assertive was not safe. And
Yeah.
so it may be a gender role that we feel that we shouldn't be saying things or we shouldn't be
Mhm.
demanding a certain kind of treatment or level of treatment. It could be bias, it could be, internalized depression. There's so many different reasons why someone might not want to speak up that it's almost like I'm not even going to bet, I'm going to say it is one of your superpowers is to have these antenna that are able to the level of emotional intelligence to be able to go, "Oh, I just heard that person say 3 words and I can tell you right now there's something going on and I'm going to go over at the end of this meeting and I'm going to say, hey, so we do need to be almost, really good at feeling the room about what's going on and like seeing dynamics in action. Cause in this case, people just aren't going to say anything, especially on the volunteer side,
Yeah, we have to remember those things and follow up, and ask questions, and it is scary. But the more we tell staff, we got to call this volunteer. We need to have a meeting. We need to resolve this to be that leader in that uncomfortable space to say this is how we're going to move forward, and also how did we get here? How did we get to this point? And the same with staff. If the staff are not communicating to us that things are happening to them via volunteers, that we have no idea. And I've had several calls where I tell someone, this is the first time hearing of this. Tell me more. Okay. And then it all starts to come together, because sometimes the squeakiest wheel is not what is unraveling.
Right.
Sometimes it is, the squeakier wheel might get some attention right away, but other things can be unraveling below that we don't hear about until a little bit later.
Yeah. Aside from, people's dynamics when it comes to conflict and whether or not they, feel courageous in the moment or maybe they don't feel so brave, are there other things that get in the way of volunteers and staff resolving conflict amongst each other?
Sometimes taking things very personally.
Mm,
And I coach myself and say phrases out loud as I prepare for a discussion or where I want something to go. And I'm thinking, it's not about me, it's about them, or it's about the community we're serving, or it's about this event being successful. It's not about me.
mm,
That is hard for some folks to do. To take themselves out of it, especially if there is a conflict that has begun to get very personal,
mhm,
that can be something that is a challenge to work through. I've had some mediation training. I think all volunteer managers should to take some of that to help people kind of navigate, because when we're bringing in so many different personalities together and ages and motivations, I mean, these things are going to happen, and we have to be that leader.
yeah, yeah, I love that. Figuring out, where people are coming from, being able to mediate. Yeah, just it's so interesting why people might not step up. And, you know, I always for our own self, and feeling like they can speak honestly and really I think sometimes people don't even know why they're hurt. When you think about volunteerism, people when they're really passionate about a cause, it's part of their identity. If you think of like some of the people that I think are the most connected to their volunteering are animal welfare folk. It
Oh,
is part of their identity. They are bringing, kitties and puppies home to like care for them in their own homes. There is, it's the public private is very closely knit in that particular type of volunteering. And, so people do take it personally, but if you, as the mediator, can help move that sort of personal, attachment to the cause and just help them see a different perspective on, yes, we all take this personal because we all care about this cause, right? And if you can just help people shift their perspective just slightly, they can kind of take it out of their, it's all about me and my ego, right? We want to get people out of
yeah.
the ego space because it's not going to help. We have to be able to give up some of our ego to sometimes find a middle ground with folk that we're in conflict with. So I love that idea.
We gotta hit hit them with the facts. We gotta hit hit them with the facts, and that's why, we do
Huh.
record keeping, and we have data that we can lean on, and we can dispel some things. I mean, sometimes we think, "Oh my gosh, are they right? Is this true about my program or my organization or me? Let's pull the data. Let's see what that says." I love doing that. Then I can
Oh,
see,
yeah.
"Wow,
Do you
we
ever
actually
do you ever
don't
bring
have."
people together? Like, do you ever bring staff and volunteers together in a room to stop the like he said, she said? Have you ever done that? Or do you do
Oh,
that
yes.
regularly?
Yes. No, thankfully, not regularly. Thank you.
Mhm.
A lot of things can be handled over the phone, but in-person meetings is my first thing. Let's put it out on the table. Let's talk, and I want to hear right from both sides, because obviously there's something deeply going on.
Yeah.
And so I want to discover what that is. I'm also acting as a professional for my organization. Whether I have a program manager hat or a volunteer manager hat, we have a responsibility to our community to respond in a certain way. And then
Yeah.
I also have a responsibility to our staff to respond on their behalf as the representative volunteering, and then to the volunteers, right? So we're that referee right there. We want the best for everybody, but we
Mhm.
also need to live in the reality of facts and what's true.
Yeah. During your training, it was so great where you talked a lot about fact finding as step one before a solution. I think when we're tasked with refereeing, as you say, we think we're the ones to come up with the solution. And we don't necessarily need to come up with the solution. We need to create the space, the safe space for folks to talk it out and get to hugging it out at some point, right? And, that doesn't mean we come up with a solution. Often the people who are in conflict are the ones they are best to come up with their solution, right? So, if we can create that safe space, if you were to give people one piece of advice on a mindset shift as the person who is often the middle person, the person stuck in the middle, the referee, the person who has to, balance all of these different competing stakeholders and perspectives, what's one mindset shift or one important mindset you think is important for people in that role?
I would say think of the long game, right?
Mm,
We're in it for the long game. So, not returning the voicemail, not calling people back, not scheduling the meeting, not pulling someone aside. That's going to hurt the long game of where we want the volunteer programs to go and also how we want to be perceived by volunteers and
mm,
staff as
mm,
that resource, as that trusted coach. If we don't take action, it does not bode well for the future. So we have to think of if we keep building in this way, what will happen, right?
mm.
Get some training, read Toby's blog, come into the Impact Pro community, ask questions, get prepared. But think of the long game and where you want to grow because there will be conflict along the way. There will be staff and volunteer relationship issues, and then there'll be things to celebrate. There'll be amazing stories of
Mm.
collaboration and great success of what you're doing. But look further down the road before deciding not to take action.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Lord, for sure. Actually, I'll mention too that for more tips on improving your org's culture with support from leadership, let's say you're trying to think about how you can tackle some of these issues and you want the backing of leadership, check out Volunteer Nation episode 191, where I talk about who is ultimately responsible for your volunteer culture. It may surprise you the answer to that, and you may feel a little more empowered to go speak to your leadership because, spoiler alert, it's not your responsibility. The organization, you're not ultimately accountable for your organization's culture, whether it's your team culture around staff, your team culture around volunteers, or your team culture around volunteer staff relations. It's actually your executive who that is their job. Their job is the culture of your organization. Now, you have responsibility for nurturing it, for helping on the ground level with managing conflict and making sure the program is running smoothly. But you need the support and buy-in of that leadership. So you should not feel like you're doing this all alone. If you do, then some things got to change. And that may be the first conversation that you have is with your supervisor to say, hey, I can't be in this alone. I'm just one person, but I also totally agree with you, Karina. You got to lift up that carpet and stop sweeping stuff under there. There's stuff under there that you need to not sweep under there anymore because, people notice. People do notice. I mean, I don't know. Karina, I'm sure you've had to dismiss a volunteer before. I have. And you'd be surprised. Like, it's like the worst thing ever that you have to do. And on the other
Yeah.
hand, you have like rules and, there's things that have to go a certain way and there's certain things that are cause for immediate dismissal and you got to let people go, or it's through progressive discipline, whatever it is, it's game over. And, it's not a fun thing to do. But then people will come up to you like, it's, kind of sidle up to you and say quietly, I'm so glad you did that. Or if you call something out or try to improve something, that's thank you so much for. People are noticing. If we think when we sweep things under the carpet, it's under the carpet. It's only under the carpet for us. It's in everybody else's plain view, right?
Oh, yeah,
So
especially if they're not at your organization 40 hours a week. They're not
yeah,
seeing a lot of other things that maybe your staff are seeing and maybe not as noticing. But when your volunteers are only there 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours a week, and they're seeing that this constant issue, that's all they're seeing in their shift. And
yeah.
so I'm glad they take notice when things have improved and hopefully give feedback. But if things are swept under the rug, it's pretty evident because of the amount of time that they're actually with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks also don't want to, where there's bad blood or bad vibes. People just don't, like they're spending their leisure time. It needs to be fun and joyful. So, well, anyway, Karina, this has been really great. We talked a lot about what the different perspectives you have, and you've talked about what you've taught in your core seminar. Karina, we mentioned her seminar, and I'll just shout it out here. It's called Starting Fresh with Staff and Volunteer Relations. And it was recorded and posted. The replay's right now inside the community. It's got a great start guide to help you transition and use and implement transition your learning into real practice. And you can be inside the community asking questions and getting advice from folks, including Corina, on what your challenges are with staff and volunteer relations. So if you're ready to go beyond ideas and start building a strategy that really works, both in this regard, but also in your organization as a whole, check us out inside the Volunteer Pro Impact Lab. Karina is just one of 6 fantastic guest advisors that we brought on that are offering their expertise. We are so excited. We're just getting started. We've got lots of training we're going to plan for the rest of the year. So join us on the inside. It's great for intermediate to advanced leaders of volunteers and people working in organizations that want to improve their volunteer programs. If you want something more fundamental, check out our Volunteer Management Fundamentals course. That's great for people in super small organizations and just starting out who want a really good foundation. Join us on the inside. We have amazing people like Karina who are just really excited about helping you thrive. And Karina, any last bits of advice? And then I'm going to ask you, well, first of all, any last bits of advice for folks? And then I'll ask you our final question.
I just want to say thank you for making it to the end of this episode. You are a rock star to be thinking about staff and volunteer relations, to be turning to the Volunteer Nation podcast for thoughts, ideas, inspiration. Keep listening, go back, check out some other episodes. But any amount of time that you are spending on this as a busy professional wearing many hats with a limited amount of time and you're only one person, I give you kudos for making time. Jot down those ideas, those things that you're thinking about on your walk or on your commute that you can do to help staff and volunteer relations. Get on that professional development ticket, get in front of new employee orientation, anything that you can do. Start an employee only newsletter with volunteer management tips. Which is something we talked about in our training inside the community. Anything that you have capacity for, one thing, I encourage you to get started, and I don't think that you'll regret it.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, if you think about it, if you are purposeful about how you are approaching volunteer staff relations, and inside the seminar, we talk a lot about what that looks like. Think about the difference it would make in your time spent putting out fires and managing conflict. If you've set the stage for awesome teamwork, the need for all of that mostly goes away because people manage conflict at their own space, at their own level. They don't need to come to you. And so it is a great investment of your time to create a place where people can row together. It's just more efficient in the long run. So absolutely, Karina's given us great advice today. So everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast. I want to ask Karina one final question that I ask all of our guests, and that is, what are you most excited about in the year ahead?
I'm really excited to keep volunteering. I do serve with several professional organizations like Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration, CVA. I'm also an Alive volunteer and mentor, and I help out with Engaged Journal, where Toby has an article talking
Oh, I
about
do.
volunteer management progress report. So make sure you go to engagedjournal.org and look for Toby's article. I love to serve the sector, so I'm really excited to continue in those roles.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a link to the Engaged Journal. I actually do have an article. Well, I didn't write the article, but I was interviewed for the article, and it's about our
Yeah.
10 years of volunteer management progress report, how we did it, what we did. Is it all over? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we'll do another one. We don't know. But it was a fun kind of retrospective. If you're interested in doing your own research, it's a great primer on how to do industry research because we've been doing it for a decade. It's hard to believe it's been that long, really. So, well, thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you know somebody who's, tackling this topic, go ahead and share this episode with them. And if you liked it, give us a rating and review. We like 5-star ratings because it ensures that more people see us. That's we're in the game of helping people. So the more people listen to the pod, the more people are going to get help. So, and join us next week, same time, same place on the Volunteer Nation. Take care, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review so that we can reach more people like you who want to improve the impact of their good cause. For more tips and notes from the show, check us out at tobyjohnson.com. We'll see you next week for another installment of Volunteer Nation.